to build the border wall. Reaction from House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy this morning. I'll speak with Democratic Congressman Jeff Van Drew as well on his party's response. Plus, Attorney General Bill Barr starts his first full week on the job tomorrow as former acting FBI Director Andrew McCabe drops a bombshell in the Russia investigation. Republican House Intelligence Committee member and former prosecutor John Ratcliffe is here, live coming up. We are awaiting word from the White House this morning as President Trump calls a meeting of his top trade negotiators as the clock ticks down on a March 1st deadline to reach a trade deal with China. The Hudson Institute's Michael Pillsbury is here. All of that and more as we look ahead right now on Sunday Morning Futures. Democrats are vowing an aggressive response to the president's declaration of national emergency to get more money to build the wall. Here now is Democratic Congresswoman Maxine Waters on Friday.
It's time for everybody to stand up, all hands on deck, to refuse this president these fake emergency powers that he'd like to have. And so I'm urging everybody, get together, rally in every community across this country all this weekend. Send a message to Washington, D.C.
And a number of Republicans and Democrats in the House and Senate say that they object to the president's plan as well, some calling it an overreach of executive power. Joining me right now in an exclusive interview is Republican House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy. Congressman, it's always a pleasure to see you. Thanks so much for being here.
Well, good morning, and thanks for having me back, Maria.
Is this a national emergency? Your reaction to what's happening with the president saying that it's a national emergency, but some of your colleagues are pushing back.
Well, first of all, does the president have the authority? And the answer is yes. Since 1976, when the law passed, presidents have declared more than 60 emergencies. But also look to this. When the federal government does an act, governors have the responsibility that they can declare an emergency. And in 2005 in Arizona, Janet Napolitano, who then became DHS Secretary for Obama, declared an emergency because of what was happening on the border. So did New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson. And Bill Richardson cited the lack of movement by the federal government. So the president, one, has the authority. Yes, it is a crisis and emergency along our border. First of all, think about the human trafficking that is happening.
Yeah.
Think about the children that are being moved across these countries. But think about the amount of drugs and how many thousands of Americans are dying, and most of that is coming through the southern border. So the president, one, has the authority. Yes, it is an emergency that has been shown before. And I believe at the end of the day, this wall is going to be built, not sea to shining sea, but about 200 miles.
Well,
he's got the appropriations that which just passed.
Yeah.
He's got 55 miles there. Then he has other abilities to pool money, such as from the Treasury, the forfeiture. This is from illicit crimes that people have done. So he's got about $600 million there. He's got $2.5 billion from inside Department of Defense to be used for counter narcotics to fight drugs as well. This is where that should be used. And then he's looking at MILCONs, the military construction items.
So this is about $3 billion roughly that he can use other monies from other areas. But the overall bill was a lot lower, as you know, than what the president wanted. He wanted $5.7 billion, but you still voted yes for it.
Yes, I did, because you know what? It was a down payment moving forward. Remember this, just about a month ago, what was Nancy Pelosi saying? Only $1 for the wall, that they would eliminate beds, which would mean criminals would be left out into our society, and they would abolish ICE. ICE has just received more money than they ever had in the past. We have the ability to keep the number of beds we had before, and they just voted for $1.375 billion, 55 miles of new wall. So if I'm weighing that compared to a continuing resolution, which would not get any, of course, this is moving it in the right direction. Is it as far as I want it to go? No. But the combination of this bill and the action what the president is doing, we're getting to the end result that we need to protect the southern end of our border.
Let me move on and ask you about this meeting that the president has called today and tomorrow for members of his trade team. The China talks are going to be continuing next week. And, of course, then you've got USMCA on the table. A lot of colleagues in the House have told me on the Democratic side they won't vote for it as it is. First, talk to us about how the China talks went and what you'd like to see in terms of a deal between China and the United States as these talks continue this upcoming week.
Well, I haven't been able to get an update since they've come back from China, but I was talking to Lighthizer and others before going. I want to credit this president because he is really moving against China and making for a level playing field is something that America should have done a long time ago. The entire Western Hemisphere should have been able to do this. But what I find is that we are getting movement to where we need to do to protect our intellectual property rights, to have a fair and level playing field when it comes to trade. And I'm seeing good movement, so the president wants to have an update, continue those talks in Washington next week. And I think the entire world is watching that this would put us on a better stage to compete against China at the same time with a level playing field.
Is he going to have to change USMCA in order to get that ratified?
Okay, now that's different. That's between Canada and Mexico. I'm not sure that he will. For those Democrats who are saying that they wouldn't vote for it, I'm not sure they read it or seen it because nothing's been rolled out completely. This is looking at NAFTA and improving it, modernizing it. I think at the end of the day, they will support it because it's going to make not only America stronger, but our trading partners as well. It is a good policy for American jobs, and it's stronger in, one, when you're modernizing it, protecting our intellectual property as well.
Let me move on to some of the big news over the weekend. Congressman, you sent a letter to Adam Schiff, now the chairman of the Intel Committee. We know that Adam Schiff has said for a long time, he said this 2 years ago, that he has more than circumstantial evidence that there was collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. And we also know that this past week we got news from the Senate where the Senate said there was all of its findings after a two-year period. They have found no collusion. Explain the letter that you sent to Adam Schiff and what you're trying to do.
I put it out on a blog, and what I raised questions about Adam Schiff. Yes, you state that in March 2017 he said he had this proof. He sounds like a modern-day Joe McCarthy and can't produce anything as we move through. We've had the Senate and the House investigate this and say there is no collusion from Republicans and Democrats. But you know what we recently found out, Maria, and I've got to thank you because this is something that you have been monitoring the entire time and bringing out information on. We now find that Adam Schiff met with Glenn Simpson, the co-founder of Fusion GPS, the individual that created that fake dossier, in Aspen, which was never been known to us. First of all, what did they meet about? And this was after the committee wanted to look into Glenn Simpson even further because the credibility of the answers he gave when he came before the committee. Then think about this. I want to know, what did they talk about there? How many other times have they met? But why did Adam Schiff fight when we wanted to find out who paid Fusion GPS? Well, we found out that it was the Democrat National Committee. But why did Adam Schiff fight that? And then why did Adam Schiff ask Glenn Simpson in the hearing, what should we investigate? Where should we go? Why is he taking direction from this individual that does not have credibility, that created a fake dossier? And then Adam Schiff, who is now the chairman, why doesn't he hold himself to the same standards that he asked Jeff Sessions and Devin Nunes? He should recuse himself based upon meeting with an individual that we're looking at from creating the Fusion GPS, from Fusion GPS, and not even telling us. In that part, the bias of what's going forward, he should recuse himself from any future investigation or being the chairman.
This is, of course, the guy who was paid, his firm was paid $1 million to create that dossier. Bruce Orr's wife worked at that firm. Glenn Simpson running the firm, Fusion GPS, that created that dossier, which was used to wiretap an American citizen, Carter Page. And we know that it was unverified and salacious, which is what Jim Comey called it.
And remember what Adam Schiff said, because he said Devin Nunes met with somebody at the White House. He had to recuse himself. Remember Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, had to recuse himself because he met with some Russian he didn't really even realize when he went through. Now we're knowing from the Hill that Adam Schiff knew who he was meeting with, Glenn Simpson, in Aspen. What did they meet about? Even after the committee knew they had to investigate Glenn Simpson further because the credibility of the answers he gave inside the hearing. they contradicted. He could be lying before Congress based upon investigation and answers given by other individuals.
Right. And now, of course, we all know that Hillary Clinton paid his firm Fusion GPS to create that dossier when we didn't know the specifics before. Okay, Congressman, let's take a break. You want him to recuse himself from the Russia probe. That was one of your questions within that blog post. We'll take a short break. When we come back, you also had a tiff with Congresswoman Omar. We're going to get to that coming up. And a lot of people questioning the Republicans' financial responsibility and discipline as we look at debt. We'll take a break, and we've got more with Congressman Kevin McCarthy when we come right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are back now with Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy this morning. And Congressman, we're ending that first block talking about the Adam Schiff situation. We should point out that we got compelling testimony from the number 4 guy at the DOJ, Bruce Orr, who basically provided calendar notations and notes, which told us that, in fact, Glenn Simpson started meeting with Bruce Orr back in August, and we know that the Democrats were saying that they hadn't met until Thanksgiving, which was important because it shows you when they actually started investigating President Trump.
That's the key question of why we wanted to look at Simpson even further, because there's reports that his testimony is not the same matching, so the credibility there. But now you have a chairman of the committee privately meeting with him when the committee is going to investigate him further. That's bias.
Yeah.
And this is why he has to recuse himself, so the American public can trust any report that comes out of that committee or any investigation. This is a real challenge. He has to answer why, what did they talk about, and how many other times has he met with Glenn Simpson? Let
me move on, because Congresswoman Omar made a remark. She said it's all about the Benjamins, which you reacted to, and then there have been calls for her to be moved off of the Foreign Affairs Committee because of her comments. You got in a tiff with her on Twitter. Tell us about it.
Well, I had a press conference a week prior, and I was just talking about the Democratic leadership to a number of these new freshman Democrat congressional people, their anti-Semitic talk, the other items that they have been saying, and the leadership has been silent. And if they're silent, are they agreeing with this? In doing so, a reporter wrote about my press conference, and that's what Congresswoman Omar was responding to. But she was saying people were supporting Israel based upon receiving money, which is false. I thought, again, it was anti-Semitic. And finally, the Democratic leadership came out and said she should apologize. But there is something much further they should do. Congresswoman Omar sits on foreign affairs, and we've watched what she's done through investigations, through questioning and others.
Right.
She should be removed from that committee. When you watched what the Republican leadership had done when anybody on our side made some questionable comments and others, we removed them from committee. So it's a little telling to us why they would not act. Now, we acted on the floor. We added an amendment to a bill to make sure that America stands with Israel, that we do not support this type of language anywhere in the world, because we've watched what has happened in history in the past, and we will not let it repeat itself.
Yeah, I know that you relieved Steve King of all of his committee assignments after remarks that he made. So we'll see if there's any movement here in terms of taking her off of foreign affairs. Real quick on debt, you've been the majority leader and now minority leader for several years, but over these years, a lot of people are questioning the Republicans' fiscal discipline. You are looking at $22 trillion in debt right now. What's the plan to start weaning ourselves off of debt as interest rates move higher and the interest payments alone are quite substantial?
This is the greatest threat to our country, Maria, and you're correct. Now, when we were in the majority and I had to hand that gavel back to Nancy Pelosi, in those 8 years, what Congress has real control over is discretionary spending. When I handed the gavel back, in those 8 years, discretionary spending was actually lower than when we were given it to it 8 years ago. It's the mandatory side that's a real challenge, with the movement of the entitlements, the growth when you came to Obamacare, a new entitlement. And now you look to the Democrats, this new Green Deal that would add $3 trillion. This is a real concern, should be for all Americans. When we failed to actually reform and sustain what we need for the future, Social Security and others, by reforming Obamacare, we lost by that one vote, but the House was able to pass that. This is something that both sides should sit down and seriously take a look at, but not just look at, take action. And on the discretionary side, we have done well. On the mandatory side, we cannot sustain these programs for the future without taking some action now. And that's something that we've been running on for the last 10 years.
Well, I don't expect anything to do about this during an election year. But as the Committee for a Responsible Budget points out, you're talking about interest spending topping $1 trillion. Interest spending alone.
You need to do it now in election year. You have to be honest with the American people, just as we have been before we even took the majority. We laid out that we would protect Medicare, we would protect Social Security, because if you do nothing, it cannot sustain itself into future generations. And we laid our budget out where the Democrats attacked us, but the American people supported. We were able to pass that, but what the viewers need to understand, for any reform to happen, it takes 60 votes in the Senate.
Right.
It was the Democrats who have denied the ability to have this change, so the debt continues to grow. That continues to harm future generations, future opportunity. It is the greatest threat we face today for the next century being ours. Well, that's why, yes, we should tackle it now, not wait till after the election.
We will be watching, Congressman. It's good to see you this morning. Thanks so much. Congressman Kevin McCarthy there. Democratic Congressman Jeff Van Drew is up next on the emergency declaration and his rejection of the Democrat proposal, the Green New Deal. We'll get reaction from the Democratic side next as we look ahead on Sunday Morning Futures. Back in a moment. Welcome back. The Democrats in Congress reportedly devising a strategy to challenge President Trump over his declaration of a national emergency at the southern border. This setting up a showdown in Congress and the courts that could go on for years. Joining me right now to discuss that is Congressman Jeff Van Drew, a Democrat from New Jersey. And Congressman, it's good to see you this morning. Thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, it's great to see you, and thanks for having me.
So, Congressman, are you going to join your colleagues in pushing back against the national emergency?
Well, let me just say something real quickly. You know, when I believe the president is right, I support him, and I have supported him. When I believe he's wrong, I say that he's wrong. I'm not a real strong partisan, and I believe in bipartisanship. In this case, I think the president has overreached. I think this is a constitutional issue. I think it's an important issue, and I do think it sets up a precedent for many reasons. The bottom line is, you know, you have to be careful what you wish for, and right now, you know, some folks might be happy and think that this is good, but I don't know if they'd be so happy if there was, for example, a very progressive president who decided that it was a national emergency, what's going on with climate change, and decide that they were going to move a lot of money from the military and other areas to climate change issues, or if there was a president that was from a different viewpoint and really felt that the gun issues were a tremendous emergency and actually move money to have guns confiscated from people.
Yeah.
You know, you always have to watch for executive power getting too great on either side of the aisle. It's something that our founding fathers believed in very much, the balance of powers, and taking money, military construction money, and it isn't the amount so much. The amount isn't so huge. It's the principle of it. It's the principle of it, and actually using it for something totally in which it was not intended budgetarily, I really do think is problematic.
Well, let's talk about that, because you're talking about $3 billion from these non-emergency funds. You heard your colleague Kevin McCarthy talking about it a moment ago. $600,000 from Treasury forfeited funds. This law was signed, obviously, into law by the Congress and passed by the Congress, rather, and it's been utilized 58 times since it was implemented. On average, it's been used every 9 months. So if you've got funds that are meant or allocated and appropriated for anything around national security, construction of national security, that sounds about as close to building a wall around a border as it gets.
Well, now we're using money that's military money to build a domestic project. Usually money is used, in this case, on that line item for the military to protect the different areas, whether it's, in this case, it would have been housing. It would also be the housing for the military planes itself. Those 58 times, let's be clear with that, all those 58 times, only once or twice has there actually been an appropriation of money involved with it. And of course, the one time that really mattered, and it was appropriate, was in 9/11. But the other times, the other 50-some times, the money is used for emergency situations, such as when there is a terrible situation that occurs, a catastrophe, or money was used for freezing funds because the country was doing something wrong. But the money was not used in this way. This is different. This is unique. I think you make really important points, and it's very practical of you. But do you think there's an emergency? I mean, given that there is drugs coming over coming through the border as well as the ports, given that there's human trafficking, as the president has discussed, and all of the other things that we see coming through the southern border, is this an emergency? This is a serious situation, and you know I believe that it is, and I've spoken about it, and I've supported him in a lot of what he's spoken about. So what I think we should have done is use more money still is going to be spent for this issue of border security than ever before in history in this budget. Let's use that money. Let's go forward. Let's get all the work done that we can with it. Let's keep the working group going. In fact, I really recommended having a working group where you didn't have elected officials necessarily. You had completely nonpartisan experts make more recommendations, and as we get into the next budget, allocate more money where and when needed. I don't think it is of such a nature that we really have a constitutional breach, and I think this is a real constitutional issue. And there are many Republicans that feel that way, and people that really strongly believe in the Constitution feel that way. Of course. And nobody should ever allow this to get mixed up with the other 50-some times that the emergencies were used. They were totally different situations that did not take the power of the purse away from the constitutionally dedicated area, which is Congress. And as you said a moment ago, you've taken sides when you think it's right or wrong. I mean, the Green Deal, you put out a statement about, you were against it. Your colleague Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's $1 trillion plus deal for a green change. Exactly. We can't do it right now. It would, I don't know that we ever can do it, but we certainly can't do it now. We do not have the money. You were speaking about the debt before. The debt is a very serious issue. If interest rates rise significantly, or even if they rise at all, the debt issue is going to become a huge problem. We fund in the United States of America, through all the interest we pay, the entire military of China. Think about that. Yeah, that's pretty incredible. And I said $1 trillion when I was talking with Congressman McCarthy. I want to make sure people understand that's $1 trillion a day. $1 trillion a day just in interest payments. Real quick, Congressman, because you're from New Jersey, I've got to get your thoughts on Amazon. Obviously, they've changed plans because of the pushback from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and some of your other colleagues there. Would you like to see Amazon set up shop in New Jersey? Yes. What Atlantic County is looking into it down around Atlantic City area. I know Newark is looking into it. The bottom line is this is the world we live in now. I know some people don't like corporations or don't like incentivizing corporations, but I think that we have to compete, and we certainly have to make sure that we create jobs. And frankly, if they don't want those jobs in New York, we sure do want those jobs in New Jersey. All right. So you think it was a mistake what happened in New York then? I do. I do. We can't be, we are still, I mean, we're going to have to make a decision in all seriousness as a nation, Republicans and Democrats. Are we an entrepreneurial capitalist nation and do we want jobs? That certainly has a safety net? And do we want jobs? And do we want to succeed? And do we want to compete? And do we want to see our people do well? Well, it's all very good questions. Yes. I think I know the answers as far as our viewers' personal feeling about that. Congressman, it's good to see you this morning. Thanks so much. Very important conversation there with Congressman Van Drew. Meanwhile, there are big new developments this morning in the Russia investigation amid reports of discussions removing President Trump from office. All of this as a brand new Attorney General Bill Barr set to begin his first full week on the job tomorrow with a very full plate. Member of the House Intelligence and Judiciary Committees, Congressman John Ratcliffe, a former prosecutor, is here. Next up, Sunday Morning Futures. Right back in a minute.
Two cabinet members were, quote, ready to support an effort to remove the president from office. That is according to former top FBI lawyer James Baker in a closed-door testimony to Congress last fall. Baker said he was told by senior Justice Department officials that Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein spoke of the two cabinet officials' support. I want to bring in right now Republican Congressman John Ratcliffe from Texas. He is a member of the Homeland Security and Judiciary Committees, as well as Oversight. And, sir, it is good to see you on the program this morning. Thanks so much for joining us.
Morning, Maria.
We want to get your take on this story. You are a former federal prosecutor, Congressman, and we learned some information this week on two fronts. The Senate told us that there was no collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia after 2 years of investigating this. And number two, Andrew McCabe, the former deputy director at the FBI, in an interview with 60 Minutes tonight, said that he launched the investigation into President Trump. Your reaction?
Well, as to the collusion issue, the Senate just confirmed what the House and every other investigative committee has found, which is no evidence of collusion. And as you mentioned, Maria, the only person in Washington so far that says they have evidence of collusion between Donald Trump and the Trump campaign and Russia is Adam Schiff. And, of course, he says that is evidence that is neither direct evidence or circumstantial evidence, which are the only two types of evidence that exist in the law. So we'll wait on that. But as to the issue of Andy McCabe, he may be a disgraced former FBI agent who's been criminally referred for lying, but he's going to make at least one truthful statement in this interview tonight. Many of us have been saying for the last year that senior leaders at the FBI and the Department of Justice have been secretly investigating Donald Trump and trying to remove him from office. Tonight, Andy McCabe will tell you that he and other senior leaders at the Department of Justice and the FBI were secretly investigating Donald Trump and trying to remove him from office. Now, once you get past that one truthful statement, the rest of his story, frankly, has bigger holes in it than the Titanic.
Well, I mean, look, we heard from Bruce Orr in that other testimony a couple of weeks ago when he did tell us that, in fact, he met with the Fusion GPS founder as early as August of 2016, and we did get that testimony was quite illuminating in terms of what did go on.
It did, and we've gotten a lot of testimony. As you pointed out, Maria, as a former federal prosecutor, I will tell you that as a conspiracy starts to unravel, sometimes the co-conspirators turn on one another, and you get inconsistent testimony. Bruce Orr's testimony is inconsistent with his boss, Sally Yates. Andy McCabe's testimony is inconsistent with his boss, Jim Comey. Jim Comey's testimony is inconsistent with his lawyer, Jim Baker. McCabe's testimony is also inconsistent with Rod Rosenstein. So you have all of these things that were taking place, and again, it underscores the point that there were senior officials at the Department of Justice that were the same officials that had undermined and prejudged Hillary Clinton as innocent, prejudged Donald Trump as guilty. Right. And they were the ones making the decisions in these investigations.
So here we are beginning week one for the new Attorney General. He is now in the job, Bill Barr. Tell us about what you're expecting from him, because people would like to see accountability. And we should point out that Andrew McCabe is doing this interview around his book, but he has already been referred to by the Inspector General for criminal charges.
Yeah, so let's go back to Andy McCabe and what you're going to hear tonight. One of the things he's going to say is that he started this investigation when Jim Comey got fired on May the 9th because he believed that order may have come from Vladimir Putin and that Donald Trump was acting as an agent of the Russian government in carrying out that order. The problem for Andy McCabe is every newspaper in America reported that 8 days later, on May 17th of 2017, Andy McCabe was one of 4 people to walk into the Oval Office and interview with Donald Trump to become the FBI director. So how do you go from, I think you're an agent of the Russian government committing treason, to 8 days later, I think you're an agent of the Russian government committing treason, but I'd sure love a job working for you every day. So this is just part of the challenge that faces Bill Barr. I will tell you, it's an incredible challenge, but he has the opportunity to be perhaps the most consequential Attorney General of our lifetime. Because he's going to have the opportunity to try and restore the American people's confidence in a Justice Department that has been torn apart by the darkest chapters that have been written under the Comey, Lynch, McCabe era of the Justice Department and its component agencies like the FBI. I would certainly hope that that in engaging in doing that, the first order of business for Bill Barr would be to address the byproduct of those senior leaders at the FBI and the Department of Justice that were trying to undermine the American election of 2016, and that byproduct is the Mueller investigation.
Right.
If Bill Barr's first action, Maria, is not to bring in Bob Mueller and say, you know, the American public has been consumed with this for 2 years, and this idea of collusion between Donald Trump and the Russians. After 2 years, either you have evidence of it or you don't. And if you do, let's see it. And if you don't, let's make that clear to the American people so all of this can end and we can move forward with what the Department of Justice should be doing.
Yeah, but in the meantime, you've got people like Adam Schiff saying they're not going to slow down. They're going to expand the investigations into President Trump right now. Congressman, stay with us. I want to ask you about that, but I also want to ask you why you voted against the bipartisan border security deal. We'll talk about that right after this short break. Stay with us. More John Ratcliffe next up. We're back with Texas Congressman John Ratcliffe. And Congressman, we just ended our last block talking about what will be on Bill Barr's plate. Do you think we'll see accountability? And what about Adam Schiff and the Democrats vowing to pursue investigating every corner of President Trump's life?
Well, I certainly hope there's accountability. Bill Barr pledged that there would be during his confirmation hearing. He said he was troubled by a lot of the developments that have now become public, and he promised Senator Graham and others at his confirmation hearing that he would get to the bottom of that, and we intend to hold him accountable to that standard. As to Adam Schiff, again, it remains to be seen whether or not Adam has this secret collusion evidence that he hasn't been able to produce up to this point. But what we do know Adam Schiff does have is a conflict of interest under a standard that he created. Remember, he said that Devin Nunes needed to recuse himself because of a perceived bias with regard to the Russia investigation. Now we learn that Adam Schiff met with Glenn Simpson, the same Glenn Simpson that got $1 million to commission the phony, fake Russian Steele dossier document. The same Adam Schiff that is now believed to have lied to the committee that Adam Schiff chairs, the House Select Intelligence Committee that I'm on.
Right.
So under Adam Schiff's own standard, Mr. Simpson needs to come forward, but Adam Schiff can't be the one presiding over that.
Congressman, let me switch gears and ask you about this budget deal. You voted against this border funding deal.
I did.
Why?
Because the president, as commander-in-chief, said he needed $5.7 billion to fulfill his primary role, securing the sovereignty and integrity of our territorial borders, to provide for the common defense, the one thing that we have a federal government for. Congress gave him a quarter of that, $1.4 billion, woefully short of what's needed. So I certainly wasn't going to support that, and I am going to support the president, again, meeting his constitutional obligations. Again,
Right.
The Constitution says it in the preamble, and as you pointed out, Maria, the National Emergency Act created by Congress also gives him that authority, and he's testing it. Listen, if the Supreme Court says that that's improper, Donald Trump will abide by that. But I appreciate the fact that he's being relentless with respect to his desire to secure the sovereignty and integrity of our territorial borders.
Yeah, relentless to the extent that people are saying it's not lawful. You just heard what Congressman Van Drew said. Walk us through this money, this $3 billion that is available to him, and your reaction to some of your colleagues saying it's the wrong move, constitutionally speaking, to declare a national emergency, to use this money.
Well, as you pointed out already, Maria, the National Emergency Act was created by Congress. It has been used, I think, 58 times. So we see it quite frequently. And in this case, what the president is trying to use is military construction money. That, by definition, means the military is using it for national security purposes. So when the president says, I want to use it for national security purposes, for the purpose of constructing a wall, it seems entirely appropriate and would be on solid legal footing.